Okay, we're coming at you with more groundwork here. We're going to get into a kneeling sequence here. So in this sequence, we'll work through a lot of different kneeling positions. Before we get into the why, let's go ahead and start our first kneeling position. So the first kneeling position we're going to practice is low kneeling. So I'll demonstrate the position and then I'll offer you some modifications. This is it, low kneeling. So from another angle, that might look like this. So you see my ankles are plantar flexed, and I'm going to think about my weights and spaces. So please work along with me if you can. If you can't, I'm going to offer you a modification here in a second. So weights and spaces, major weight is head, shoulders, rib cage, pelvis. I'm just thinking about having those stacked on top of each other with a neutral spine. Eyes on the horizon. And we'll get into why in just a bit. You could start to look around a little bit at your environment. So the modification, if that's difficult for your ankles, you don't have the pliability or ankle plantar flexion available to you today, or you haven't even gotten to that with your ankle work, you could use a blanket. So that looks like this. This is a really nice position. You want to actually get the blanket pretty rolled up pretty tightly, and then place the blanket over your heels, or it's almost like hooked onto my heels. So that looks like this. This feels good. So again, lots of plantar flexion required in my ankles. I'm thinking about weights and spaces being balanced on top of each other, hips, rib cage, shoulders and head. The spaces, by the way, are the neck and the space between the rib cage and the pelvis. So whether you're doing the full low kneeling position or you're doing the modification with the blanket, just think about, and please work along with me on this, think about kind of trying to take your sternum toward your chest, your sternum toward your chin and your chin toward your sternum. So we're not popping the rib cage here. That would take us out of balance, but we're just bringing the sternum up and the chin down. Now, another modification is the use of a yoga block. So you could put a yoga block between your thighs, sort of squeezing it with your heels. This feels good too. And so it's just a little bit different feeling to the blanket. My ischium or my sits bones are not on my heels now, they're on the yoga block. So we all have different spaces between our ischium. So if you feel like you need to turn the yoga block or get a larger or a smaller one, do that for yourself, or squiggle around, squirm around so that you can get your the bony part of your pelvis onto the yoga block. So that's low kneeling. So with no modification, if you're ready for that, it's here. So why would we kneel? While we're in this position, I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. So this is a rest position or a recovery position. So if you're training hard, if you're doing some natural movement training and you need to take a rest, this would be a position you could rest in. This restful position, though, has a lot of use to you. So it's helping your knees to have more flexion, which means you're going to have to train in more quad extensibility. So if your quadriceps are feeling short, this is a great way to get more length in the quadriceps. Of course, the ankles are being trained too here in really good plantar flexion. So prepping your ankles, this could actually be a preparatory position for more aggressive work too, to get your ankles ready for positions that they require more that would require more pliability. Also, this could be a contemplative position. So maybe you're training very aggressively and you're in nature and you see something beautiful you want to sit with, or you just want to sit quietly for a bit. This could be a position that you rest and sit and become contemplative in. If you're doing that, you might enjoy the position of looking down at the ground instead of out at the horizon. So feel that in your body. Notice the state change that happens. In fact, why don't we do that right now? So notice the state change that happens in your body as you do this. If you're in this position, in this restful, low kneeling position, and you look at the ground, how does that feel different in your body than looking at the horizon? Different hormonal bath, really. So play around with that. But let's move on. So from this low kneeling position, we're going to get into sort of a log roll with your thighs. So that means we're going to take our thighs and roll them over to one side. I'm going to go to my left. You can do that too, or if you want to work to your right first, that's fine. So now my right ischium is on my left heel and I'm reaching. And then I'm going to go to the other side. So I'm going to log roll. My left ischium now is on my right heel and I'm going to reach. Back to center. Let's do that again. So log roll your thighs to one side, reach to the opposite. Here's a counterbalancing, good counterbalance practice. So my center of mass is going to my left and I'm counterbalancing with my right arm. It's a great stretch for the lateral side of your body. QL, obliques, some lat work in there. Okay, other side. So I log rolled my thighs over to one side and I'm reaching with my left hand. When you do this log roll thing, work with me just a little bit longer. So as you log roll, try to keep your thighs in contact with your calves and notice the sensations that happen there. You could sit all the way to the other side and post. So how can you accomplish that movement by just sort of sliding over your lower legs? Your feet are going to do some interesting things in the back where one is going to slide further back than the other, and that's okay. Okay, that's a lot of plantar flexion, and if you were in your modification pose, you may not have that log roll available to you. It might be a little awkward, but just play around with shifting your weight back and forth. Okay, so come out of that position just into a bent sit position so we get a little dorsiflexion in the ankles as a rest. So toes toward the ceiling, stretch your feet the other direction. And then we're gonna build on that low kneeling position into some other kneeling work. By the way, one thing we might think about kneeling is that it brings us closer to the ground where we came from. So it's a very humble position, and it reminds us that we are connected to the ground. So isn't it interesting that a kneeling position is used in some forms of worship or spiritual practice where we are more connected to the ground while we contemplate things above us? Okay, low kneeling. So from another position from another angle that might look like this. And we already did our log roll, so work with me on that, back and forth. Now from there, we're going to get into flexed foot kneeling. So low kneeling to flexed foot kneeling. Now our toes are tucked. They're extended. If this is difficult for you, to have your toes on the ground and your ischia resting on your heels, just place your hands on the ground. Try to keep your ischia close to your heels if you can. If that's difficult, just come into a quadruped position and do a little rocking with your toes extended. Now we're going to get into some toe work in other videos, so we won't spend a lot of time here, but find the modification that's good for you. But the sequence is to come from low kneeling, work along with me, low kneeling, weights and spaces, sternum toward your chin, chin toward the sternum. Flexed foot kneeling. From flexed foot kneeling, we're going to bring our knees up into a deep knee bend. Now here we're going to play a little bit with this position. If that's difficult for you, stay in flexed foot kneeling. If flexed foot kneeling is difficult for you, stay in this modification with your hands on the ground or quadruped. If that's too difficult for you, stay in low kneeling. If low kneeling is too difficult for you today, stay in a modification of low kneeling and play around with rolling your thighs back and forth. If it's too difficult to roll your thighs back and forth, stay in this modification. If this modification isn't working for you, put the yoga block between your thighs and play in this position. Wherever you are, play there so that we can train in more pliability without forcing a change. Change should come slow and gently. Okay, but if you're willing to go forward and you feel like you can in your body, from low kneeling, we're going to go to flexed foot kneeling, deep knee bend, and then we're going to start to play around with tapping a knee on the ground. So I tap my right knee, and then I'm going to tap my left knee. This is, again, great counterbalance work. So from another angle, in my deep knee bend, I'm tapping my left knee, tapping my right knee. Back and forth. Here's another way to practice counterbalancing. Let's work back from the beginning, and I'll show you that. So go back down to low kneeling, flexed foot kneeling. In order to come up into your deep knee bend, send your hands out and bring your knees up. So now we've taken our center of mass backwards, but I'm counterbalancing with my arms in front. Do you remember when we counterbalanced before? Before, we were counterbalancing by taking our hips to one side and reaching out. Now, we're counterbalancing by taking our arms out and our hips back. If you need that, great. If you want to play around with, and I would encourage you to come from flexed foot kneeling with relaxed arms, just bring a knee up, or both knees up. If that's difficult for you, bring one knee and then the other. Can you work back and forth, placing a knee down and taking the opposite knee up that you started with, right? So right knee down, left knee down, left knee up, right knee up, left knee down, right knee down, both knees up. Okay, so that's a lot of work on the front of the ankle and the front of the shins. So take a rest position. In all of this work, I'm going to encourage you to breathe through your nose and exhale. You can exhale through your mouth, but since this is restful type work, try to make your exhales longer than your inhales. So this is a bent sit position. Hey, while we're at it, why don't we give you a little preview of a position we're going to be in earlier so you know what I'm talking about. So come into this long bent sit. So I've got one leg long and one leg pulled up next to my chest, and I'm hugging my knee in toward my chest. These positions, by the way, many of these positions they're anthropological. I mean, these are positions, I don't even know if that's the right word, maybe ancestral is a better word. These are positions humans have sat in forever, right? As long as humans have been around. So it's good to remind your body that these are fundamentally human shapes. So long bent sit. From the side, just looks like this. Not only are they fundamentally human shapes, but these are shapes you did as a kid on the ground all the time. We want to remind your nervous system, we want to bring these back into your movement repertoire. Okay, so we'll come back to that long bent sit in a second. So bent sit, back to kneeling. So work along with me. We're in low kneeling, flexed foot kneeling, deep knee bend. Had to counterbalance there a little bit. Tap. 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 Now, if that's all going really well for you, we're going to drop back down into the squat. This, and especially this morning, is a pretty challenging position for me, but I'll do my best to demonstrate. So I'm going to actually separate my feet here a little bit. You don't have to. If you have the pliability just to drop back down into a squat, good for you. This morning, I'm going to have to separate my feet, And you know, let's make the point here. Each day may be different for you in your practice. So some days you may have a lot of pliability available to you depending on what you did the day before, nutrition, etc., etc. Work where you are. So I'm going to drop back down into the squat. You see I raised my hips a little bit because I had to. And then back to deep knee bend. Okay, from the beginning, I'm going to speed it up here a little bit. Stay wherever you need to be. Work along with me if you can. Low kneeling, flexed foot kneeling, deep knee bend, little tap, drop back down into your squat. If that's feeling okay for you, shift your weight over your right heel or your left heel, bring the other leg out. So now we're back into that long bent sit. If you have that available to you, go for it. If you don't, practice, pause the video, practice over and over again. Even the practice will create more pliability for you. And this is low risk stuff. Okay, so now we're gonna try to lift our hips and bring this other foot back under us, back to our squat. And then shift hips over that heel, drop the other leg out. That is feeling very difficult for me this morning. But good practice. Okay, so now we're coming back to our squat. Deep knee bend. From deep knee bend, place your left knee down. Right knee is going to go out. Our right foot is going to go out, and we're going to reach with our opposite hand. Back to tall kneeling. New kneeling position. That looks like this. Tall kneeling. Get my microphone situated. So tall kneeling is weights and spaces are balanced. And this is flexed foot tall kneeling, by the way. I could plantar flex and just be in regular tall kneeling with the feet plantar flexed. Okay, so we asked you to go to tall kneeling. Now we're back to deep knee bend. Popping the knees up. And then the opposite foot, opposite knee. So if you did the right knee earlier, do the left knee now. Come out with the right foot, reach. Tall kneeling, tall flexed foot kneeling. Back to deep knee bend. Then we're going to drop back down into our squat. Shift your hips over one foot, bring the other foot out. Come up into your squat, shift hips, other foot out. That's some work. Come back to your squat. Deep knee bend. Flex foot kneeling, low kneeling. One more round, and then you can just play on your own. So if all of that is feeling okay for you, and work along with me. So we're in low kneeling, little log roll, and reach. Flexed foot kneeling. Deep knee bend. The deep knee bend, play around with dropping a knee down. Requires some extensibility in your toes. If you can, drop back down into your squat. Shift, leg comes out. Pop back up into your squat. Shift, leg comes out. You see I'm making all kinds of compensations with my feet this morning. You may have to as well. Again, these are low risk positions, so even those compensations are helping with the pliability in your ankles and in your hips. Okay, popping back up into our squat. Deep knee bend, right knee down, out with the left foot and reach with the right hand. Tall flexed foot kneeling, flexed foot kneeling, deep knee bend, and then we're gonna go with the opposite. So left foot down, right foot out, reach. Tall flexed foot kneeling, flex foot kneeling, deep knee bend, back down to flex foot kneeling, low kneeling, and you're done. Okay, so thanks for engaging in this kneeling practice with me. Again, work where you are, rest in between, and just watch your pliability grow.